All right, happy Friday again. Good to see some people in the stream. Today we are going to talk about AI podcast generator. So you voted on LinkedIn. This is the topic for today. It was a close vote, almost 50-50, but in the end one vote made the decision. All right, let's get started. This tool which I have built to actually generate a podcast, actually voice of two people talking with each other, was inspired by NotebookLM and Illuminate. If you haven't seen this before, maybe let's have a look into this tool first, and then I can show you how I rebuilt this thing so you have more control. You can do your own voice cloning and make this more personalized to your company, to your voice itself, and to in the end to yourself, right? So let's see what I'm talking about. So this is the tool which Google has built. It's basically a research assistant. You can upload material, text, videos, links, and this helps you to understand one specific topic. And this tool has the capabilities to generate a podcast. So you can actually listen to a topic where two people talk with each other for you to understand and learn about a maybe new topic in a really creative and audio way. And this works by creating a new notebook. And from here we can paste text. So let's paste some text. Just say test for now. This could be an article. This could be a book you want to learn about more. So any kind of text will work. A website will also work. YouTube videos. So it's very diverse. So we can insert this here. And from here, you have this possibility to generate a podcast. This is what Google has built, and I wanted to build the same. See how far can I take it? How good is it actually compared to what Google has built? And I wanted to clone my own voice. So let's head into this. First go back to the slides, give you some idea on what kind of technology we're actually using. And then we go into the code and I can show you how I built this. It's as always on my GitHub, so you can check the code out. You can run it yourself. Obviously, if you want to clone your own voice, you can do that, but you can also rely on Google's voices. And we also dig a little bit deeper into voice cloning today. So let's stay tuned. All right. Before I go into the technical details, let's start by first how this is actually working, right? If we want to build a podcast, we need to have some kind of conversation between two people, because this is usually how a podcast is working. And as input, we have, for example, an article, one of my articles. So for some of the articles I have, you see a podcast now. This is AI generated. We take this text from the podcast, text from the article, and send this to a large language model. I'm using Gemini for that. And based on a prompt, we will see that prompt later, we get an interactive conversation between two people. So person one is talking, person two is talking, person one is talking, person two is talking. So this alternating conversation. And we're taking this text we are getting and sending this to a speech synthesis tool. So we use Google speech to text for the woman voice, and I use 11 labs where I clone my own voice for myself. And then we are taking the audio files which are generated for each conversation for each part of the conversation, and sending or merging those clips together. And at the end, this is our podcast. And I think that's really interesting. It's where we have the prompt, because the prompt influences how good the podcast is. So we want to have emotion in the podcast. We want to have, like today when I'm speaking, I make mistakes. I maybe say or We want to just have this kind of personality, this human feeling also as part of our conversation. So we need to tell Gemini to actually build a conversation that it sometimes have errors or repeating words, a lot of emotion. So we'll see how this works. And with that, as I said, it's not a lot of tooling we're using. We're using Gemini, we're using Google Speech to Text, and 11 labs. So just 3 different services, and that's it. And then we can have our end-to-end podcast generator. All right, but what was my goal actually? I wanted to have full control, right, over the voice and also over the prompt. And now NotebookLM, I want to show this quickly, just to make sure you can also do this. You can also now, since a week or two, you can also customize it a little bit here, but you don't have full control, right? You can influence a little bit how the podcast is generated, like focus on specific topics or target a specific audience, but that's it. We don't have full control over the podcast. That's fine, right? It's a out-of-the-box tool, and it's good. It's really good what Google has built. Let's see how we can customize this. So let's head over to the code. As I said, it's on GitHub. You can check it out yourself, run it yourself, and see how good this works. And maybe you can even clone your voice. We come to that later. So let's start with the code. And I think the very first important step is the prompt. As I said, this is something where you can play with it. I'm not telling you this is the perfect prompt. There are probably even better ways to do this prompt engineering for building a podcast. But for me, this worked quite well. So I say, right, based on text, like an article, you create an engaging conversation between two people. So that's what we want to get. A lot of emotions, maybe at least 30,000 characters. So we get a long conversation. Usually with that, I get around 6 minutes of podcast. You can play with this. So you can make it shorter. You can make it even longer. And I want to have names. So Sasha and Marina, now they can actually refer to each other. You can tell, all right, Sasha, that was really nice talking with you, right? We want to give some personality to the people. And then I give some context about the speaker itself. I tell them how the podcast is called, so it gets an understanding on what is the machine learning engineer, right? It's not a person, it's actually how the podcast is called. And then have excitement during the conversation. Do not mention last names, because sometimes I have in my article, I have my last name. It's fine to mention the podcast, but yeah, doesn't make any benefit to it. And then I include filler words like to make the conversation more natural. And you can also tell it to repeat words. And then I have this, thanks for having me, Marina. This was repeatedly added to the podcast, so just added to remove it or not mentioning it. All right, here you can play with it. Add it to your style, mention your company name to make it more unique to your company. Whatever you need, right? Even more emotions, or focus on a specific topic, or like exactly how Google is doing it with NotebookLM. So this is the prompt. And based on this, we generate the conversation. So I'm using Flash. You could also use Pro if you would like to, but Flash works really well for this kind of use case. I have a high temperature because I want to have it very creative, right? Hallucinations sometimes happen. We could reduce it maybe a little bit to avoid hallucinations, but usually I am listening to my podcast before I publish it, so I make sure it's at least good enough to be published, because still hallucinations can happen. And we have a response schema where we define how the response looks like. So you see, we have an array of items, and each array contains a speaker, so the speaker name, so it's Sasha or Marina, and the text of the speaker. And this JSON we are getting, it's later used to be better to be parsed, right? We want to always have a valid response, so we can parse this JSON and get the text to send it to the speech synthesis APIs. This is what we're going to do here. I also calculate the costs for generating this this conversation. It's actually pretty cheap. We can have a look at the costs later at the end. And then I'm storing the conversation for me to just check it and see what was generated. And we are taking this conversation, and if we scroll down actually to the end, you see first we generate this conversation. This is what we're getting. And the second step is already generating the audio. So it's, as you can see, just 200 lines of code. It's not too complicated, but let's have a look into the audio generation as well. So we iterate over each part of the conversation. We extract the speaker, so Sasha or Marina. We extract the text, what this person is actually talking. And then we synthesize speech. And synthesize speech, depending on the speaker's name, I use 11 labs for my own cloned voice, and I'll use Google for Marina's name. So let's start with the Google one, and then we dig into the 11 labs side of things. So let's go into the Google speech synthesis. And here you can see we use the speech to text client. We have our text as input. I define, where do we have it? The voice mapping, so what kind of voice we actually want to use. And the cool thing is that the voice which is used by NotebookLM is a voice you can also use yourself. And if we are going back to this one here, this is the Google Cloud speech UI, where you can generate your speech. So, and here those voices, the Journey female, so Journey F, and Casual K, I strongly believe those are the two ones which are used for NotebookLM. So if you want to have the same voices like NotebookLM, you can use them. In general, those journey voices have a lot of emotions. Doesn't work well to build a podcast with those neural voices, but journey and the casual, they really, if you tell something like, oh wow, this is impressive, then those voices can actually understand this is something where I need to be excited. So the voice goes up. Really good voices. I can highly recommend them. They're feeling really natural and they're quite new. So it's still in preview and beta, but I think it's going to the direction where we're seeing or getting Gemini have this voice input and voice output. So I'm getting that's why they're releasing those newer, much better voices, much like OpenAI did. So they need to compete here. They're getting really, really good. I see there are a lot of comments in the live stream. Cover that in the end, or you can also always write me on LinkedIn if you want to have a deeper discussion. All right, so those are the voices. As I said, I'm using this one for the female voice because there's a lot of emotion and my voice is cloned. So let's go. You can actually also give this a try. You can put some text here, try the different voices, just click synthesize. Takes you a few seconds and then you can actually play it and see how this voice sounds like. We will see that later. I hope I can stream my audio here. We will see. Let's go back to the voice. So we have this mapping. You see if it's Marina, I'm using the Journey O. This is a female voice. And for Sasha, I use my 11 Labs. So let's go back to the voice generation. So we're taking this text and generating the audio, and the audio files are all stored in a folder. You see we have audio files. So for each conversation, for each text, we get one audio file. We can actually play this, but you can run the generated podcast in the end. All right, next step. After generating the voices for Google, I also need to create my own cloned voice. For that, I use 11 Labs because it's really good in actually cloning your own voice. There are two ways to clone your voice with 11 Labs. There's a cheap version, which is basically instant, just it's 1 minute of audio to clone your voice. Doesn't sound perfect, but it's usually good enough. I use the more expensive version, which needs, I think, 1.5 hours of voice. I can show you how you can do this in 11 Labs, but let's cover the code first. So we get an URL, 11 Labs URL. We are basically sending our content, our text to 11 Labs and use a specific model ID, which is basically the underlying model of my cloned voice. And I need to send my voice ID also as part of the API endpoint. So you see that here, 11 Labs. This is my voice ID for my own cloned voice. So if you clone your voice, you get a specific ID for your voice. So you can reuse that and clone your own voice or generate audio with it. All right, let's quickly look into 11 Labs. As I said, there are different pricing models which are used on 11 Labs. If you want to have this more professional cloned voice, you need to use the creator package, which costs $22 per month. It's actually quite a lot, but you can build really cool features with it. It's not only voice cloning. 11 Labs has a lot of other features, but I only used it for voice cloning. You can also use the cheaper version for $5. There you basically get your instant voice cloning with just 1 minute of audio, as I said. It's not perfect, but usually it's good enough to at least give it a try. I use the professional voice cloning. And here, if you're on the 11 Labs UI, you simply click Add New Voice, and you see we have this instant voice, which you can get from the cheap package. And I use the professional voice. So you need to upload at least 30 minutes of audio. I uploaded a little bit more. And you need to repeat some text, so they ensure it's actually you. Allowed to clone this voice and make sure you do some voice mapping here. And then takes a few hours and you're getting your cloned voice. That's really cool. You can actually use your own voice not only in English, but you can actually use your voice in different languages. So if you want to produce a podcast in English with this cloned voices, you can do it in Spanish, in Russian, in French, in Italian. So it's really cool, and it adapts your own voice to a different language. It's also funny to listen to hear yourself speaking Italian. It's a lot of fun. You need to try this at least once. All right, and from there, if you scroll down, you see we have this generate audio. After we have synthesized all the parts of our conversation, we merge the audios together. So it's just a little bit of Python audio things. So we take the audio files, put everything together in one big audio file, which is our podcast. And this podcast you can use to upload somewhere to I don't know, to Spotify, for example. I have my podcasts all on Spotify. It's not like I want to have a big audience on Spotify. It's just to let people listen to it if they would like to. And also, if I'm sharing this article or this code, they have an example. You can watch my videos, you can watch my clone voice, and you can actually see how good the clone is. All right. From there, I would say we actually run this. This is all the code we have. So it's not a lot of code, and I think the most of the magic is your voice cloning and having an engaging conversation. And this is where you can play with the prompt. You probably can have better prompt engineering as well. Maybe some prompts in sequence, one who checks or one who adds more emotions or filler words. But yeah, I think it's for a starting point good enough. I have this as a Python script, but I also have a small Streamlit application. So why not actually use the Streamlit application to give this a try run? So here's the podcast generator. Let me grab an article. Let's take the hallucination article here. Just one of my articles from Medium. We take this, paste it here, and click Generate Podcast. And we're actually going to do the same on the Python side here. So let me... hallucinations, it's called. All right. Let's go into Generate Podcast. We reference the hallucination podcast here. And we run this. Let's give it a few minutes. Usually it takes a minute or two to generate this podcast. So currently it's, this is already the conversation we're getting back. And now it's doing the speech synthesis for each of those conversation steps. So this now runs, it's sending the text to the APIs, and we're getting the audio back. Now, if you wonder about the spider in my face, it was Halloween yesterday, and they're really hard to get off. So I have now a video on YouTube where you can see my face with a spider. But I think it's fine. The kids had fun. Right, let's see. We are done soon, hopefully. We can actually check the conversation meanwhile. So you see, this is how the JSON looks like. We're getting the speaker. It's always iterating, right? Sasha, Marina, Sasha, like a conversation. And then we're getting those. I'm equally excited, Sasha, so we will see how this later sounds like. And then you have this conversation. And this is basically all we need as input to create the audio. And now it's done. Let us listen at least a minute or two to this podcast. I hope you can hear this. Let's give it a try. Welcome back to the Machine Learning Engineer podcast, everyone. Today, Marina and I are diving deep into the fascinating and sometimes frustrating world of large language models, specifically their tendency to hallucinate. It's a topic I've been exploring quite a bit recently, and I'm excited to share my thoughts.
I'm equally excited, Sasha. Hallucinations in LLMs, it sounds almost magical, but in reality, it's a significant challenge for the field. So for our listeners who aren't familiar, can you explain what exactly is meant by an LLM hallucination?
Sure. It's a bit of a provocative term, I admit. Essentially, it means the model is generating outputs that are completely made up. It's not grounded in reality or its training data. All right, I hope you could hear that. Not sure if this OBS setup is working for you, but I guess it worked. If you could hear my voice, you see it's very close to mine. My son actually said, "Papa, is that you?" So I think that proves it's good enough to be recognized as myself. And this is how you generate a podcast. You could take this, you see it's 6 minutes long, as I said, with those 30,000 characters, or how did I find it? Characters? Yeah, characters. It's not 30,000 characters, but it generates a 6 minutes long podcast. You could reduce this number and you get a shorter podcast. I think 6 minutes is good enough for a topic. And from there, let's actually go also to the UI. It's still generating the conversation. Not quite sure why. Maybe we can reload this and give it a try. Let's see. But you're getting the same here, right? You're getting the conversation as an output, and after that, it generates the audio for you. All right. If you want to listen to the podcast which I generated, it's on Spotify. It's called The Machine Learning Engineer. I also have an article on how you can generate this podcast. So I have a deep dive article. I will share everything on LinkedIn. You find this later on YouTube. And below in the video description, there is a link to the article and there's also a link to the code. So I hope you find this fun and let's see more AI generated podcasts. It's cool. It's also nice if you have an article yourself. You can just listen to an article and learn something about it in an interactive way. So I think Google has built something really nice with NotebookLM. A lot of people like it. I like it myself and had a lot of fun actually building this thing. I hope you enjoyed it and I wish you a really nice weekend soon. So see you hopefully next Friday. Have a good day. Bye bye.